Jomo, can you see my
Sorry, say again.
first slide okay?
Actually, we don't. Can we try again? It might be on the wrong screen.
Well, and as I think about that, I think there's one more share I need to click on. Now you do, right?
Yes, there we go. All right, well, we'll get this show on the road. Good morning, everyone. This is Jomo Stewart here at the Fairbanks Economic Development Corporation. We're here for a special Energy for All Alaska Task Force meeting on Thursday, September 26th. Right here at 8:05 in the AM. And our guest is Mr. Dan Robinson. He is a researcher at the Department of Labor. Here to give us a little bit of a discussion of things that happen at Department of Labor research, some of their work, but also again about the hot topic of the day, which is our migration patterns and how those migration patterns are impacting our demographics today and through time. So again, without further ado, I won't steal your thunder. Mr. Robinson, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jomo. And just remind me what kind of a timeline we have.
We give you the full hour and extra if you need it. I have nothing scheduled after this Zoom meeting. So again, we can go as deep and long as everybody wants. And actually, that's a really great reminder. As everyone knows or should know by now, again, this is for your benefit. If you have any questions or comments, you may go ahead and simply take yourself off mute and fire away. However, I am monitoring the chat box and will be looking for raised hands if you're the pensive type. Okay, but again, this is for our mutual benefit. So please, let's have a lively and engaged conversation.
Yeah, I was going to say something along those lines too, that Jomo heard some radio coverage of a presentation and a meeting we had about 3 weeks ago now in Anchorage, co-sponsored by Representative Peltola's office, First Alaskans Institute, AFN, and ICER on outmigration was the kind of meeting topic. And so I'm gonna show you the slides that I used then, and then some Fairbanks specific data that I put together since then, just for this purpose. But I'm happy to be derailed a little bit with any questions or kind of other topics related or otherwise, if you know of data that we produce and questions you have about what's going on demographically, economically, either one. Primarily, I think demographically today. So jumping right in, and Jomo, I'll just kind of rely on you to either unmute people or like you said, monitor the chat or the hand raise. I'll pause different times just to give people a chance to jump in, so it's not just a monologue.
Sounds good. And by the way, this was also topical because, again, FEDC did a pretty big and wide-ranging analysis of the Fairbanks economy, the FNSB economy. Gave the presentation in tail end of July, and a big part of that was about demographics, migration, and the numbers were quite interesting. So yeah, I know that a lot of that was based on you all's research and data, so it's nice to have the source.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And demographics are going to be a big kind of economic story for a while because the baby boomers are such a big group, and it kind of turns things on its head in terms of the number of people working and the number and the percentage not working. Dependency ratios are one of the ways we phrase that, but there will be some real challenges because of demographics and some opportunities too. It's a very nice time to be joining the workforce because there are lots of opportunities. So this when we say outmigration, two things are going on, and at this meeting we had, it felt important to separate them, partly because of the sponsorship of AFN and First Alaska's Institute. There was a bit of a rural focus. So I wanted to clarify at the beginning that there are these two things going on. One is that more people have been moving out of Alaska than in for 11 years now and counting. So we've got negative net migration or net out migration. One of the important points about that is it's not necessarily because more people are moving away from Alaska. In fact, the number of people leaving Alaska is a little bit lower than the 10-year and 20-year averages, about 40,000. But we've had for about that 10, 11-year period, fewer people moving to Alaska. And we should be careful not to oversimplify that because those numbers go up and down a little bit from year to year. But it's tempting when you hear outmigration to think everybody's leaving, because we know the stories when somebody leaves. If a school teacher says, I can't do it anymore or whatever, and they leave, we've got a story to tell about that. So we remember those things a little more, not a little more, a lot more than we remember the people that don't move to Alaska. But so don't make the mistake of thinking everybody's leaving, and that's the simple story when we say there's been net outmigration for 11 years. It's that balance between how many are moving and how many moving here, how many are moving away. And then the other thing that we will talk very little about this morning, unless you're particularly interested, is this longer term trend that goes back 100 years of more people leaving rural communities and moving to them. When I say 100 years, clear back to lots of family farms going away, people moving to cities. That's a longer term trend, longer term challenge. And in that meeting, I wanted to make it clear and separate the two so people didn't conflate them. And then another point, just broadly, it's outmigration at its simplest. People leaving is not necessarily a bad thing for a community. There are good reasons people leave to get training, education, experience. Some of them come back, and that's kind of the happiest possible outcomes for a community, that people decide as adults they want to live there. They've got education and training that help them be valuable members of the community. So we shouldn't hold too tightly that and assume that everybody leaving is a bad thing. I'm sure that many of you on this call left and came back. Some of you just chose Fairbanks for different reasons, and that's new blood. There are good things about that for a community, to have that kind of in and out. And Alaska is unusual that way among states. That we have the biggest migration trends, the biggest percentage of our population that comes and goes every year, almost all the time. Once in a while, Nevada or some state with really strong in-migration will be higher than us, but most of the time, Alaska has the biggest migration flows. And one of the results of that, the second bullet on this slide, was that we do have a smaller than average percentage of residents who were born here. And one way to describe that is to say our roots are shallower. We don't have as many multiple generation people who are here. And the Sept on this slide refers to the Alaska Native population. That's about as deep as roots get in a place. It goes way back. And it's not a small percentage. About 20% of Alaska's population are Alaska Natives, although that population too comes and goes a little bit. But I thought it was important we say shallow roots, sure, but there is a subset of our population with noticeably deep roots. And again, both of those can be economic assets. You have people who, and some of you may be in this category, you have decided that Fairbanks or Alaska is your home, and you can't imagine a scenario where you would leave. That's useful to build on. Those are people committed to making a community, a state, a better place. There are others who, if we collectively do things to make our schools good, to make public safety good, to handle homelessness, all those things, there's a group of us who will say, I'm going somewhere that does those things better. So, and that's not wrong either, to have high expectations, to a little bit like shopping. You say if this store stops being what I want it to be, I'm going to shop somewhere else. So both of those things they have their place and their value. And I'm just going through a few these headlines. These are a few of the we've written about migration a handful of times, more recently because of this unusual trend. But so these covers are just some of those issues of our monthly magazine called Alaska Economic Trends. If you don't know about it and are interested, you can subscribe for free. If you just Google Alaska Economic Trends, there'll be it shouldn't be hard to find it. If it is, shoot me an email. But we try to write about things that help decision makers, policymakers, businesses make better decisions is kind of our broad focus.
Economic developers, yeah, it's a great
Absolutely.
resource.
Yeah, yeah. Training community, the university, definitely policymakers, state politicians, federal politicians. So the point here on this slide, well, Alaska is interesting because, and this is, I think, a really nice economic asset. Historically, we have been especially attractive to people in their late 20s through their 30s, even into their early 40s. We have a lot that pulls those people to Alaska. Fairbanks, in particular, the military is a big part of that, but it's not all of it. There's also incredible world-class hunting, fishing, trails, just beauty, space. There's a lot that we have that's appealing to younger people and slightly more men in that group than women, but plenty of women in their 20s and 30s historically have come to Alaska, and historically we've had more move here than move away. Once you get into
and we have a world-class university.
Yeah, amen. And that goes into the next thing I was going to say, and this is interesting for Fairbanks again. For our entire statehood history, we have sent more of our 15 to 19-year-olds, our roughly college age kids, away than we've attracted. We've been a net loser of those people. And Fairbanks probably comes, I have to look at the data to confirm this, but, and you thinking about UAF though, I suspect Fairbanks as well, and I know this is true of Anchorage, despite having a university there and keeping some of our students there, we lose more of our students still than we attract from other states. That's something that should get our attention because that's maybe an opportunity missed to invest more, to grow the university programs more, to maybe to market them. I think we've done a nice job of keeping the price very appealing, very attractive to in-state students. And I have a handful of my kids' friends who've gone to UAF specifically for engineering programs. So I think UAF probably more than the other campuses it's got a longer history. It's been the more PhD programs. So there are things to like about that and things to work with. But just know that unlike Massachusetts, North Carolina, California, lots of other states that bring more of those college age kids in than leave, we have the opposite situation. And then when you get older, this won't surprise anybody, but more people leave Alaska when they start approaching retirement years than move to Alaska. And that's been true for our whole history. We're not Arizona or Florida or Nevada. The ones who stay are especially tough, and we're glad they stay. And the ones who leave, we say good luck to you, and you're too soft to be an Alaskan. But the second bullet, this is of minor importance, I think, for you guys now. But once you're in Alaska, the moves that happen in state almost always, not almost always, predominantly include Anchorage as either the place you're moving from or moving to. So I'll leave that at that. We've done, and I'll pause just if anybody has any questions, especially clarifying questions. If you say, what do you mean by that? I'd hate to miss a chance to clarify something that might be interesting to you. So don't be shy about those questions or any questions.
I second that emotion. Again, if you have any questions or comments, I am monitoring the chat box, obviously, but I'm also monitoring the participant list. If you'd like to raise your hand, you may. Otherwise, you're perfectly free to just go ahead and take yourself off mute and fire away.
And
Thanks,
we'll
Dan.
have, I only have, I'm halfway through now, that many slides, so we'll have plenty of time at the end too, if you want to, if it's easier for whatever reason to do that. So in the kind of current years, and I've already touched on this, we've gone from being kind of back and forth, positive, negative migration over the years, generally determined by how our job market and economy are doing relative to the US. So if for example, in 2008, 2009, when the US economy was in the Great Recession, that didn't hit Alaska very hard. And in those years, more people moved here than left. And that's happened several times. But this 11-year period is a new thing. We haven't had that long of a streak of net negative. And that applies to every age group, even that 25 through 30s. Those are now just barely negative. We still have a lot of people coming in those age groups, but we have more leaving now than coming, which, as you probably are aware there and throughout the state, among other things, that means a loss of school age kids. Those people in their 30s especially tend to be parents. So in addition to kind of some lower birth rates, if we're losing people of working age, then we're also losing kids of school age. Let's see. So this one, the parenthetical on this first bullet is a kind of interesting. Matsu and Kenai, and I'll mention this in a minute, are a couple of places that have had positive net migration in recent years. More people moving there than moving away. But people don't go from outside Alaska directly to Matsu or directly to Kenai very often. What they tend to do is move to Anchorage, Fairbanks, or Juneau. And Anchorage is especially interesting because the numbers are the biggest. And I think it tells us something. They start in Anchorage, but then they end up in Matsu or Kenai. And that begs the question of why? What do those places have that Anchorage doesn't? One of the most obvious things is less expensive housing. And there's some other possibilities too. And then just in-state migration also, it's 20s and 30s. People in their 20s and 30s, this is not this won't surprise anybody, but that's when people tend to move the most. And then this is our most recent article. I think it's fascinating. It looks at all 50 states' migration patterns going back 100 years almost to the 30s to see when states had kind of strong appeal and when people were leaving. The Dust Bowl was interesting. Lots of people you could see leaving these formerly profitable, or at least you could support a family on a farm in Oklahoma and the Dakotas, and big movements to California and some other Western states. The World War II, big movements, and then getting into the more recent era, you see, I've mentioned here, other states, we don't fare well by this measure. We're being outperformed to the extent migration is a performance metric by most of the other states. This first bullet, other states that are having strong net out migration, New York, Illinois, Michigan, they all three have 10 plus years where more people out than in. And then probably more interesting to me, the states with something working, something that's attracting people. Idaho, Utah, Arizona, Montana, the Carolinas, Texas, and Florida. And so I think a little bit about what those states have in common and what Alaska does or has historically or could have in common with those states. But they're the ones where people want to live. And again, housing is one of the most obvious to me factors. California has lost a lot of people for a lot of years. They've also attracted a lot of international migration. So it's wrong to say everybody's leaving California. California is not shrinking; it's growing. There's a lot still to like about living in California. But for decades, high housing prices in California have sent people to some of the western states, especially where housing is much cheaper. And it's part of the story for Idaho, Utah, Arizona, maybe Montana. So this is just kind of some summary. This is new for Alaska to have this long stretch. And I mentioned already that Mat-Su and Kenai Peninsula, there's something about there. For the Kenai, it's more older people, because Kenai is too far to commute to Anchorage. For Mat-Su, it's a lot of people commute from Mat-Su to Anchorage, as you probably know. For Kenai, it's starting to be the older folks retiring, and there's something about living down there that they prefer to living in Anchorage in their retirement years. And then this is the rural issue that's not new. And this is an important point when we say net out migration or out migration. That doesn't necessarily mean, and we'll talk about this in just a second for Fairbanks data, that doesn't necessarily mean that an area is losing population, because the other factor besides migration is natural increase. And that's just births, the number of people born minus the number of people who die. And for a long time, that's been strongly positive. It's almost equal now, and the baby boomers are part of that. Birth rates are a little lower. So as we look forward, the contribution from natural increase is going to be smaller than it has been. And then this is the who cares slide. And we try to keep that in the back of our mind or in the front of our mind when we're doing anything. Why does this matter? Why should anybody care? And I hope, without sounding too negative, that this gets our attention, and we should be asking ourselves, what has changed? And there are a lot of possibilities. One of the things at this meeting that I talked about is that we should think through a little bit what's going on that's Alaska specific. Childcare, for example, is not Alaska specific. Housing being not very affordable is not Alaska specific. There are some tweaks there, but housing is not very affordable across the country. Childcare is a challenge across the country. So to say that's the thing that has created this long stretch is misguided. And it's I'm talking about this as if it's simple, as if there's a single driver, and there isn't. But just know that it should get our attention. It's not how a thriving economy looks if more people are moving away than moving there. And then the second one is to get more of that rural issue. Some parts of Alaska, the smallest population centers, villages, really will be wrestling with viability if they can't keep their schools open, if they get small enough. Some of the climate change issues were part of the conversation in Anchorage. At some point, if you don't have enough young people, at some point your community itself could go away. That doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen. So here, the last few are Fairbanks specific data. So your overall population reached its highest point ever in 2012, 100,000, almost 100 and a half, 104.98. And then our 2023 estimate was down about 4,500 from that, 95,972. And I would say it's almost flat. As we've already touched on the military. The military is always part of what we need to think about when we talk about Fairbanks population trends. University is another one. and then the other things that every area thinks about. But because those things are especially big for you, and I would say the military, the university doesn't change as quickly as the military sometimes does. The F-35s are the big kind of factor in that time period.
So Dan, that maybe you're going to explain this more, but that, we've struggled with this for a long time. I've been here for since the 70s. And watching the population grow both on the bases and in the general population. And when we wrestled with this back when Luke Hopkins was mayor of the borough, and I believe it was him. For a long time, the figures were 97,000. It's like whoever's counting just picked a number and kept it for decades. And it seems like, and I was a mayor at the peak in 2012 of North Pole. It seems we have more people than ever before. Between North Pole and Fairbanks, and even within Fairbanks, it's just more traffic than ever. And it's like, where do they get these numbers when we know, yeah, we had some out migration, but North Pole has filled up again. Eielson has doubled its size. Fort Wainwright has grown. Where is this coming from? How are they counting it? Before you get into the counts, how are they counting? Because it seems that the count is off.
I love that question. And I like when people, I mean, how do you know that is a really important question. So specific to the population numbers, and then remind me if I don't come back around to a housing point that's going on a little bit in Juneau and Southeast and probably throughout the state. The ways we count population, and when I say the census does a decennial census, as you know, and then we do single year estimates throughout. And Alaska has a nice, unique data set, the permanent fund dividend. So and it's not the only thing we use, but it's an important thing. And the data could not be more clear that fewer people are applying for permanent fund dividends in Fairbanks and in Alaska than used to be. We've learned the data kind of make pretty clear that if you send out a check, you get most people applying. There are very few people who don't apply for a permanent fund dividend. That's changed a little bit recently, and it's a little bit of an unknown. But so that's one piece that makes Alaska's estimates more precise than other states. Housing unit counts are a big part of it. How many housing units there are, which you need to then know how many people are living in each housing unit. So that's a little bit squishy. The military, we work really hard to kind of stay on good terms with them so they're willing to provide us data, but that's a tough job. And depending on who's there, sometimes we get better numbers than other times. So we're not always super comfortable with the level of precision with the military. But I would not, and I'm trying to say this without my own bias because we're involved in producing the data. The data should be fairly precise because of the data elements, and in particular, the permanent fund dividend application. Back to the housing point, one of the things that may be going on is people see new housing units and they say, what's going on? Don't tell me there's not growth. I can see growth. I can see more houses than there used to be. What we don't collectively, the data community, do very well is understand how many, the occupancy of housing. There are some ways to get at that. And I think we try all the ones that we can figure out. But something that's happening here, at least, and I suspect everywhere, is the number of people per housing unit has shrunk. there are more people living alone now than used to be. So you can have some housing unit growth without population growth. So that's a long answer. And I guess a broader answer is when somebody says, it's scary, we went from 97,325 to 97,125, you can shrug and say, come on, the numbers can't be that precise. That's not a real thing. But when they go from 105 to 95, I would be very confident that you have had a shrinking population over that period because of the data.
Follow up, Doug?
Well, yeah, I again, I know, especially on the east side of town that I live on, or the borough. I guess that's what it would be, right? North Pole to Eielson, and I regularly commute to Fairbanks. I know we're at least at levels at 97. I mean, when I was mayor 10 years ago of North Pole, we'd gotten up to 2,000. I know it's up to 3,000. And I appreciate the comment because I had a family, I had 5 kids and everything, and now I'm living in that same house alone. However, all of these other units that are being built, even if they're adding one person, we've got, I don't know the exact number, but we have whole neighborhoods that have grown up with multi-housing areas, and we've attracted 3 bears to come out to um, uh, the other side of North Pole towards Eielson. They see growth. It's just I appreciate your expertise and everything. I just don't buy the number. It's
Well,
just
one thought, we just did an article on Anchorage neighborhoods. It was interesting. We'd done it before. One of the things that I noted when I was reviewing that and when we were getting ready to publish was there are always parts of a community that are growing and parts that are shrinking. So in Anchorage, Hillside, and I can't remember some of the Eagle River, there were hotspots. There were places in the community where people want to live, and the numbers supported your eyeballs that there was growth there. But then there's also neighborhoods that are shrinking. So just thinking about Fairbanks, and it kind of and we do have estimates. When I say we, either us, the Census Bureau, in kind of combination, at the clear down to the block level. So the data gets a little squishy when you get that small. But when you think about Fairbanks, are there parts of the borough that you would put in, you've got some growth areas that you mentioned. Are there others that come to mind where you think, I think they're losing population?
Yeah, and see, driving around the area, I haven't seen. Maybe Jomo can answer this, or someone else on the call. I haven't seen areas that have been shrinking. It seems that everywhere there is growth at the moment.
Yeah, and I think the housing thing, thinking of Juneau and the parts of Anchorage that I know, and I'm trying to remember the Anchorage neighborhoods that were shrinking, but because houses don't disappear when nobody lives in them, or have a big sign on them that says, 5 people used to live here, now only 1 does. It's hard to see. I mean, traffic might be one way to measure, but I like the thoughtfulness about why don't and with housing too. You say, why is housing as expensive as it is if we don't have population growth? That's another fair question, and there are some answers we've written about that. But I don't want to suggest we have kind of answers the way you have answers to math problems. This is squishy stuff to a degree. So,
well, it's important because it also affects government pass-through monies and funds to
absolutely
support infrastructure development and things. So to me, it's an important number. And I think the borough is not getting the credit for attracting as many people as they have, or keeping as many people as they have. And I'm afraid of what that ramification might be down the road if we don't challenge the number.
The one other bit of squishiness, I mentioned the permanent fund dividend, but as you know, you need to live in Alaska for a full calendar year. So new residents, and we don't really have this problem nearly as much as other states, but think of migration, legal and illegal. Think how hard it is to identify how many people are living in a community. But back to the permanent fund question, new residents, especially if they don't ever stay long enough to be eligible for a dividend, would be more difficult to identify and count with any precision.
Hey, Rick, I see you have taken yourself off mute and turned on your camera. Please.
I have, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Dan Rick Soley, thanks for joining our little Fairbanks crowd this morning. So I wanted to drill down first on the conversation you're having about units and people in them, and then I want to pivot back to kind of the demographic on age. But you're kind of answering a question that has perplexed me, because I've been here over 50 years, and over the last, well, during that period, we've developed subdivisions and all those things, of course. But in the last 25 years, maybe, there's been this proliferation to homes being built out in the hills. And if you would have flown over Fairbanks 25 years ago and you fly over now, you see many more houses in the hills. But we haven't torn down many houses anywhere. And so it seems that the number of units must be up. So is your answer to that question, since population hasn't gone up, in fact, it's modestly declined, it is simply that there's fewer people in a house, like Doug's citing his own personal example?
Yeah, I wish we had better data on housing occupancy. Like you said, you don't see houses being torn down. We don't know. I mean, if we drove around and did some kind of a, when I say we, I don't necessarily mean us, anybody, you'd have a sense. I mean, thinking of parts of Juneau, nobody lives there. Somebody used to live there, nobody lives there now. And we'd get that wrong in some cases because it would surprise us. Well, and one interesting thing too, that's messy for, I don't know if it may be worse in Fairbanks than other parts of the state. When you guys think about your social groups, how many of them are in Fairbanks part of the time now, and their houses are sitting empty, especially middle and higher income people? And whether they're still here long enough to apply for a dividend and be counted as a resident by the other measures, it's hard to say. But that's something else going on. Lots of empty houses for part of the years. And we don't know that. So I think the occupancy is more an open question and a likely explanation for some of the population decline. But I would put it in the kind of hypothesis category more than we know for sure that's what's happening.
Okay.
Well, and on that point, in regards to homes, Rick, something that we just don't really understand is the impact of the short-term rental market. So we have all those homes and units that are available for, Airbnb and Vrbo for some of our tourism guests, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're long-term residents. And we know that's a challenge, but we don't know to what impact that has on our market. So as we see some of these units go up, there are those types of questions and considerations as well that we're struggling to better understand.
I'm glad you brought that up, Brittany. And the key point there is that there isn't good data yet. There are registration requirements in different states or different cities. I'm not sure what you guys are doing now. There's a web information source called AirDNA that we were using for a while. It's now, you can still get it, but you have to pay. But there's no good counting of that. But it's absolutely a factor. You can make way more money going that route than traditional rentals. And it's a problem for Fairbanks. You've got your summer deeply, really busy season. For Juneau, we've got that, plus the weird legislative session. Anchorage would have the summer busy season. So it's taking a lot of housing units away from potential residents, especially renters, of course, but not just renters. Some of those units might be houses that would be sold to traditional owners, except that you can make so much money. Some people, they figure out that whatever.
Okay. Well, appreciate that acknowledgement of the lack of data clarity, but at least giving some granularity about what you hypothesize might be causal. If I can pivot back to the demographic numbers a minute, and Jomo, I pulled up, I think it's the right report. I'm remembering the presentation, Jomo, you did it at Chamber Lunch a few weeks back, and it was, you were summarizing an information insights report. What's that?
I have it pulled up. I have it pulled up right now on the screen too.
Okay, and it summarizing the information insights report, which was much of it was relying on Department of Labor data. And the specific thing I was interested in was a change in the senior population, nominal change from 2019 to 2022, where we increased by, what was it, 22%? And it was I need to go back to the data. I should have been more prepared to cite the actual number, but it was a few thousand. It was either 20, it might be 5,000, or it might have been 2,500. And Dan, you might pull it up because you were probably the provider of the real data. I was quizzing Jomo at the time. I followed up with Information Insights. I've never had a chance to talk to you all about it. I was just shocked by that nominal increase in our population. I mean, and we've all talked about, we're aging. And this, of course, suggests that this was an increase. So it wasn't an in-migration. It means it was our population here. So I guess that does mean we're not out migrating as seniors. So we've done a good job of keeping them here with senior tax exemption, Meals on Wheels, yada, yada. But these are big numbers. And I first wanted to make sure that I believe the data. And then, of course, the social policies and personal choices we might make, of course. But can you talk about that data and how you know that those are real people?
Yeah, well, and I'll just mention the numbers. I pulled them up, and they're behind this bullet that I've got up now. 2012, you had 7,000, we'll just say 7,100 people, 64 plus. You jump forward, that's 11 years, that number's up to 12,700. So, and as a percentage, you're talking almost, that's what, 80%, big percentage increase. And there's more of that growth coming. Let's see, baby boomers, the youngest of them are about 60. So we're getting to the point where a lot of that growth has happened. And how we know it's some of the stuff we've already talked about. The permanent fund dividend, IRS is another tax, another source of information, and then the census does a survey. But and it's, even though that number has grown, your net, I'm sure you've lost, more people have moved away in that age group than have moved to Fairbanks. There's no question about that. You've kept a good number of them, obviously. And that's an important economic asset. To the extent they have retirement savings, they can spend it anywhere. So whatever you've done to keep some of them, a good number of them, that's benefiting your economy. But I do wonder a little bit, back to the data, how we know, and I mean, that we've already talked about the ones who spend X months of the year in Palm Springs or whatever else, that we would have very little kind of ability to identify. If they're filing taxes from Alaska, if they're applying for a permanent fund dividend, and the other one's squishier, but we're all residents of one state, but older people in particular come and go much more freely. And young people can kind of be in that category too, but I think retired people especially would be hard to pinpoint and to say Alaska gets all of their retirement spending. We get some of it, especially if they keep their house. But
well, okay, so that's now you're trying to understand the economic pie, but the data itself, was that census data that derived it, that it was the 2019 to 2022, I think, was what was in our report, but you cited it.
Rick.
Yeah, which page is that on in your economic report, Jomo?
Ooh, okay, so as far as the actual presentation that I gave at the chamber, it was slide 10. On the report, really starts on page 8 and rolls through page 10, 11, 12, 13. Really, and all the migration data is on page 13.
Yeah, no, I was looking at the actual changes over those 2019 to 2023, and I just wanted to believe that I wanted to understand where that data came from. Is it actual counting of people? Are you checking permanent fund dividends? Are you looking at who applied for senior tax exemptions and extrapolating? How did we determine that was correct?
I can tell you the source notes that I'm looking at say Department of Labor Research and Census.
yeah, and it would use the decennial census as that has its own problems too, especially during COVID. 2020 census was messier by far than normal censuses, but that's kind of an anchor. And then from that, we wouldn't use things like senior tax exemptions, but certainly the dividend, housing unit surveys and data collection, including flyover stuff to count, I think.
Yeah.
But you can count housing units. We've already talked about the squishiness of whether they're occupied and by how many people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But there just aren't too many data elements that go into those. You can't customize every community's estimates. So it would just be those 2 or 3 broad data sources: dividend, housing unit survey, and then that anchor to the decennial census.
Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, here's the actual number. It was on page 5 of the report, and it cites in 2019 that we had a senior population of 10,292. And in 2023, we had a senior population of 12,648. So a 23% increase. That nominally over 2,000, 2,400 or 2,300. I mean, that is really significant for a 3-year period to have that kind of a change, and it just makes me question the data and how did we really know that?
Again, Rick, it made me question the data until you and I talked, and you let me know that you are 64. And so just by staying in town, so Whitaker left, Jim Whitaker is now in Texas.
Right.
And some of my other friends are kind of coming and going a bit, but you're here. And so just by staying 1 more year, you will, in real terms, add to the senior population of our community year on year.
Thanks, Rick.
Yeah, right.
You too, Doug.
Oh, I don't know if you guys have seen our population pyramids, but male on one side, female on the other side, and you see how many people there are. But it's interesting how quickly the numbers fall off. So the baby boomers really are fairly well defined. So I'm 57. And my group is just behind the baby boomers, and my group is much smaller than the ones 3 years older than me. So it's I don't want to be too extreme, but the baby boomers show up quite clearly in the data. When they move through, then we'll have a little bit of the opposite problem in terms of not very many retired age people aging into our communities, and we'll have the issue of baby boomers in their later years. People do, this is maybe interesting to you, if you move in retirement, you're more likely to do it in early retirement, fairly quickly after you retire. Once you get into your 70s, you're kind of committed, whatever reason you've stayed that long, you're less likely to leave at that point.
Interesting.
Yeah, so and you'd have some people in that category, because the youngest baby boomers are what, 46? They are geez.
No, we're Gen X, baby.
I think I'm the end of the boomers. I'm 1959.
Yep, so you're just barely, you're the very end of the boomers.
Don't boomers go to 61?
So it's 46 to 64.
64.
So the youngest boomers turn 60 in this year.
Hey, old guys. I know we're really hung up on this senior item. But honestly, I mean, looking at this, knowing that we got an influx of young and prime working age people, that was the F-35 bed down. And we still had a decline in those prime working age people. That is something I find highly interesting, because again, when we look at this 95,972, that includes, again, that 3,500 younger people, which would imply to me that we had a pronounced outflow of sane.
Yeah. Good.
Well, my
point.
30-ish year old son and his wife and two kids moved back to Fairbanks from Virginia. So I know some people are coming back.
Yeah.
Well, and some people are coming in. I know 1, 2, 3, 4, and a couple of them are couples who are new residents. Here in the last 4 or 5 years have moved in, and they're buying houses and starting to put down roots. I guess part of my question is, who's leaving?
So Dan, I have a question for you out of curiosity of everyone's talking about how we are noticing outmigration, everyone's speculating why people are leaving and all these different things. Are there any studies to get that qualitative data to understand why people are leaving Alaska?
Yeah, my dream would be to have an exit interview with everybody who leaves. I do ask people who are leaving, why, and then I probably annoy people at the gym once in a while, whatever. Why did you come here? What might make you leave? There's some qualitative data from the census. We've never produced any directly, but the categories aren't very mysterious. Jobs, weather is a factor when you get retirement age. Family is a big factor. Healthcare is one that's kind of interesting. You guys would be fine with healthcare. You can get all the, I mean, and Juneau wouldn't be quite. There would be some procedures, whatever, that you might need. And that's going to be important for boomers. But I'm trying to think of the other big categories. The quality of life distinction or definition, it's different for different people. So after those big ones that I mentioned, you imagine what quality of schools might mean. You imagine what the ability of your city to deal with homelessness might mean. Housing's a big one. I forgot. That's one category. People definitely move. The data supports this based on the affordability, not necessarily the cost, but the affordability of housing. If wages are high enough, and this would be true in Northern California, kind of, then you can compensate for the housing being more expensive.
Yeah,
but
I guess I asked that too, and there's been other states who have done some of these things or outreaches, if you will, to attract people back. And so wondering, are there conversations at the state level specifically to look at what that would be to attract people back and how we could see what our communities are truly missing in those economic places, talking that where, this is a weakness to our economy. And that's not just in Fairbanks, but that's across the state if you're talking out migration as a
Yeah.
whole. And so, are there thoughts or plans or anything that you know of from a
Not-
data standpoint?
No, I mean, a couple that interest me, we used to have some kind of a loan forgiveness program, a student loan. If you move back, I think that would be potentially powerful. The one small note, we did a article a while ago on where the high school graduates of 2005 are. And one of lots of interesting data in that, but one thing that I remember, the students who left to go to college outside of Alaska and then came back were here to stay. And I touched on that at the very beginning. So it's interesting. Imagine surveying the kids who left Alaska to get their education or some other kind of training or the military, whatever else. What would make them come back? And I think the one thing we're struggling with a little bit as a state that's affecting some of our important institutions, the university being one of them, K-12 probably a bigger one, is this transition into what some people call phase 3 of our economy. We had phase 1, pre-oil. We did things that other states did in terms of tax revenue, size of our government, not having a dividend. Phase 2, we've got all this oil money. And we spent it, and we saved it, and we distributed it. We did the things a rich state does. Some of them really smart, some of them maybe not so smart. But we're kind of this hybrid. It's not enough now to just have oil pay all of our bills. We're tapping the permanent fund, but we're kind of slow to create the kind of stability that institutions like the university, like K-12, like the ferry system, you need stability to function well. And if you don't have it, then things deteriorate. So I think that's probably the closest thing to a single explanation for what we're struggling with. That transition to kind of back to what some kind of hybrid of what normal states look like. Wyoming, North Dakota, we're going to have to do some of those things. That combination of hard political things, the dividend, the size of state government, revenue sources, and we already did the whole permanent fund, kind of using it as part of our revenue. But that to me is what sets us apart from other states and explains, I think, more than anything that I can think of, what we're struggling with.
Well, and still making those investments in some of those infrastructure items that we need.
Yeah, for sure. If you're just thinking about cutting and hoping for high oil prices, it's hard to make investments.
Well, Mr. Robinson, is this actually the last slide?
Yep.
Oh,
Yep,
okay.
and
Well,
you
if you
just
don't
see that-
mind, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing.
Yep. Go ahead. And I was just gonna say that last number, that's your net. That's over that whole period. You've lost 16,000 more than have moved there, and that's not a small number.
In Fairbanks.
In Fairbanks, the
Shit.
borough.
Okay. All right, well, everyone, we are at the top of the hour and the end of the presentation, but we do have time. Doug, I see your finger up. Let's do it.
Thanks. One last question. So Dan, 16,000 was the out migration. What was the in migration number that you have?
I'm glad you asked that. The 16,000 was the net. The total out would be much higher. The total in would be much higher.
See, and
That's
that's just not apparent by eyeballs. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's the net change.
What does that do to local governments? And as we talked about earlier at the top of the hour, what does that do for our government's share of the pie? And therefore, how much more is that going to cause, say, the borough to increase taxes or the municipalities to increase taxes on properties.
That working age population article that I mentioned talks a little bit about that, and I touched on the dependency ratios. That if you lose some people, but the need for services doesn't change, or if older folks need more of a certain kind of services, that's going to be part of the demographic conversation. The burden on existing taxpayers, senior tax exemptions are going to be an important topic. As a higher percentage, I don't know what you guys do with senior tax exemptions, but as a higher percentage of your population moves into the exempt category, nobody should be surprised that the amount of revenue generated falls.
So there was talk, especially during the Walker administration, about state income tax and so forth. How does this play, these facts, 11 years of outmigration, how does this play into those discussions?
Yeah, it's hard to say. State income tax, state sales tax. So politically, state sales tax seems more likely. There have been some talk about that, not so much recently. But, some people say, if you tax people, you're just going to make the problem worse. That's not illogical to say if you tax people, you take some of their income away. One of the responses I have when I say that is there is no state in the country that has a lower state tax burden than Alaska. So if you think you're gonna lose people to a friendlier tax environment, they don't exist in this country. If you put state and local and federal together, that's not as clear. But to me, the relevance of income or state or sales tax, either one, it's not so much, and it's so hard politically right now because we just think all taxes are bad, but we don't have stability, and not having stability is a problem for an economy. If you don't know how much your budget's going to be next year, if you're a school board, if you're a university, if you're a ferry system, if whatever, those are the three that I always use. There would be others, but not having that stability creates a degradation of services, and that's a problem that I think weighs much heavier than the economic loss from a new tax. But in the conversation is also, we've spent a little recklessly as a state. We had a lot of money. We did a lot of, we have big, maybe our institutions got a little out. I don't know, our institutions, some of our spending got not maybe, it certainly was a little sloppy. We spent like the new rich, and that's not sustainable. So that's also, along with taxes, part of the puzzle.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. Appreciate it.
Hey, Tony, I see that you've turned your camera on. Do you have a question? Oh, I think she might have locked up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, I accidentally turned my camera on. I was trying to make a comment, but thank you for your presentation.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, we can hear you now if you'd like to go ahead and lob out that question. Okay. Oh, and then gone. Okay. Well, this is like incredibly interesting stuff. Dan, I really, really, really appreciate the presentation. Here at FEDC, again, we've started diving into these and other kind of numbers, and we're going to be trying to dive into them more deeply. Again, just to see what they mean, but also what they imply. And again, if we're having challenges, all of our jobs is to try to find solutions, because in the end, it's building a great community and a great state. I would open it up. Rick, Brittany, any final thoughts or questions? All right. Oh, Ms. Smart, please.
Oh, no, I was just going to say thank you so much. Really appreciated the presentation. And as Gemma was noting, Lisa and I are working on some housing issues, and some of this information is really important. just a note, I guess, when the last census took place, it was a perfectly awful timing for us because we knew the F-35 bed down was happening, but they weren't arrived yet. And so that significantly impacted our numbers. We knew we were shortage count there. So having these continual challenges is definitely something that the community is grappling with. Like, you know, like that $100,000 threshold for grants and whatnot is like a huge barrier of, you know, what side you can apply for based on that. So really appreciate the methodology. Really look forward to working with you more on this and hearing more as you guys develop. Thank you for what you do.
No, thanks, Brittany. And our demographers are happy to talk anytime and even sometimes help with challenges to the census. Haynes had one successfully. There was some weird housing unit stuff. There was another community too. North Slope has challenged before. And you're right, if the census is bad, that carries through to the years. So it's good to make sure the data are solid, and I guess also make sure the thresholds, it makes you crazy when you can only apply if you get to 100,000, you can not apply at all. I mean, some of that's silly, whatever, grant eligibility determinations. But
well, and I remember it actually took some work after the 2010 census to true up our numbers. Dr. Catherine Dodge over at the borough,
yep.
That's why by 2012 we had actually reached that 100,500, because I believe that the original number, the first number that was presented by the census just seemed low, and turns out that it was. I would like to do one thing before we all log off, just for the good of the order, and really for the good of the people who will be watching the presentation via the video. Right now, I've just pulled up the Department of Labor's website under their research and analysis section. There you see the cover of the most recent Trends magazine, again, in a great resource month on month on great information relative to our state. And also, if you scroll down just a little bit, you can find not only historical Trends magazines, but a whole bunch of further information relative to the Department of Labor's research and analysis work. So again, for the good of the order, if you want to see the goodies, you can go to live.laborstats.alaska.gov, and you can always reach out to Mr. Robinson. He's proven himself to be just incredibly accessible, both to this task force, but to the state at large and our policymakers specifically. All right, everybody, without further ado, if there's nothing else for the good of the order, again, Mr. Robinson, thank you so much. And we will see you soon for the next Energy for All Alaska Task Force. Don't have anything scheduled just yet, but again, everybody just check your notices and you'll see them as they come in.